This story is about energy. For years now, climate change discussions have focused on energy transition, and for the right reasons. 75% of global emissions come from burning fossil fuels. But there hasn't been enough attention on the grid, the wires, towers, and substations which deliver this energy to the users. We cannot decarbonize the power sector without modernizing the electricity grid, a difficult problem that encompasses large investments, policies, land, and technology. The US has made among the most far-reaching promises on decarbonizing its energy system, but also has some of the biggest challenges on the grid. Let's hear from Jenny Chen, who is just outside Washington, D.C. in the United States.
Electricity is the lifeblood of the modern economy, and the power sector is key to reducing greenhouse gas and other harmful emissions to benefit human health and safety, as well as economic opportunity. When it comes to the clean energy transition, most people think of wind turbines, solar panels, efficient appliances, and electric vehicles. These are all important, but what's missing? If electricity is a lifeblood, then the transmission networks are the critical arteries connecting clean energy with the people who use it. In fact, the electric transmission grids are considered the world's largest machines. For example, the US grid carries electricity across well over 1 million kilometers of high voltage transmission lines. It's impressive, but like other things built in the last century, it's due for a reboot. Historically, the transmission grid was built up from the local level and wasn't planned for the purpose of sharing resources across broad geographies. Unlike the U.S. interstate highway system that forms the backbone of the U.S. transportation network, the transmission grid was constructed piecemeal and has many missing links. A robust network is important when one region experiences power shortages, for example, due to gas supply interruptions or extreme winter weather. During emergencies, neighboring regions can help send extra electricity. Further, low-cost, emissions-free clean energy that does not rely on fuel, but relies on weather can also be shared with neighbors, depending on who has sunshine and wind. We are in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, but these infrastructure needs and challenges are present throughout the world. For example, solar generation dominates during the day and in summer. There is more wind at night and during winter, and hydropower can store excess renewable generation for later use. Determining who pays for high upfront costs of large infrastructure is another big hurdle. In addition, how to share transmission project benefits with those who pay for the infrastructure, whether financially or more indirectly through hosting energy projects on their land, is another contentious topic. These challenges are not insurmountable, and we are seeing progress that is hard-won by diligently working toward win-win solutions between neighboring states. Further, we can leverage newer transmission technologies to increase the capacity on any given line of right-of-way, reduce energy loss through the lines, and control electricity flow given real-time monitoring of system conditions. We can also better use existing lines by improving how electricity is traded between regions. We have many solutions for building more capacity to transport clean energy using less resources and land. It is critical to modernize the electric grid to enable exchange of clean, affordable, and reliable electricity. That is why the electricity grid is a story to watch in 2024.
That was Jenny Chen, just outside Washington, D.C. This story is about plugging clean energy generation into the clean energy economy. Worldwide, we have seen enormous progress with generation. The global share of wind and solar in electricity generation has been growing at an average rate of 14%, and that's set to increase. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, says the renewables are set to become the world's biggest source of electricity within 3 years. This is good news. But to meet the 1.5-degree goal, we need to further accelerate the generation of clean energy, including a tripling of the world's renewable energy capacity by 2030. Grids are especially important for renewables. With fossil fuels, you could transport the fuel via trains, ships, or pipelines and generate the electricity where you need it, say close to a city. With renewables, you have to generate where you have sun or the wind. So the grid is even more important to bring clean energy to its final users. But there is a problem. Those connections are not happening at the necessary speed or scale. The IEA says that about 18 million kilometers of new or upgraded power lines will be needed by 2040 for national clean energy goals to be met. Without an expanded and modernized grid to carry the clean energy, the transition will remain piecemeal and inefficient. The grid story is just as relevant in the global south. In Africa, fewer than 60% of people are connected to the national grid, and this varies widely across the continent. As you can see from the map behind me, South Africa is 89% connected, while the picture is much different in Niger, with only 16%. In 2021, 40% of all the electricity produced in Nigeria, the country with the largest GDP in Africa, was from private generators. That's expensive, horrible for the environment, and a massive health hazard. With the modernized grid, we get more secure energy, less reliance on expensive stopgap solutions like generators, and cleaner air. However, there's a real political challenge. Grids have a massive upfront cost, and it can take years before the benefits of the investment are realized. Because the grid is an integral part of a system, it needs to be combined with other elements, such as complex policies that regulate wholesale and consumer energy market. And expanding the grid requires land, sometimes across jurisdictions and borders. We know that expensive long-term projects that require significant investments combined with policies are hard for politicians to tackle. But budget choices about grids made by politicians now can unleash the benefit of the clean energy revolution for decades to come. Researchers in the US found that an investment of $98 billion in transmission, distribution, and storage would generate over $165 billion in just the first 5 years. So, what's to watch for in 2024? First, watch how individual countries and their leaders will frame and prioritize increasing investment on their grid. Uruguay, for example, invested $1 billion in modernizing its grid, building the infrastructure that led to 85% of energy coming from renewables. In just 1 decade, wind went from just 1% of electricity generation to a third, with hydropower remaining the main source. How did Uruguay's politicians do it? They committed to the project and built a framework of supportive laws and regulation. Markets were rejigged to provide better incentives. The result? Reliable, clean power. And cheap too. The electricity price fell by a third between 2010 and 2022. Will more countries prioritize grid and reform and investment like Uruguay? Second, look for multi-jurisdictional projects that connect across states and national borders. This makes them more efficient and can reduce carbon dioxide emission by 10% alone. But such cooperations can be politically more difficult. In Asia, just 3% of electricity is cross-border. But in Europe, nearly a tenth of electricity is already cross-border. Last year, the European Union laid out an action plan for grid to create a more digitized, decentralized, and flexible system with double the amount of cross-border infrastructure. In the US, the potential gain for trans-border transmission system is enormous. However, institutional barriers and incentives have to be reworked so the individual states are better able to coordinate their transmission projects. Third, securing land to build grid infrastructure can be intensely controversial and may result in long, drawn-out legal battles. In Europe, it can take 8 years to get a grid connection permit, and in the US, it can be even longer. Will countries prioritize this reform? Innovation in this area is already happening. Britain, as seen in the picture behind me, is reworking its energy governance model to streamline grid connections and has a proposal to compensate people living near the power line with thousands of their energy bills. Finally, there are innovative technological solutions that are politically less difficult than rebuilding an entire grid. Digitizing a grid and using artificial intelligence helps to organize flows of electricity, routing them more efficiently through the network. Markets and utilities can be incentivized and encouraged to reward such investments. Because line capacity can depend on the weather conditions, simply monitoring wire temperatures also helps to optimize flows. In Texas, changing the wires on nearly 400 kilometers of existing grid doubles its capacity and cut electricity loss by 40%. This benefited both consumers and the environment. Bills fell by $30 million in the first year in operation, and the wires saved carbon emission equivalent to 34,000 cars. The economic opportunity promised by a clean energy revolution is enormous. Yet the potential of a clean energy economy can only be unlocked if the world's biggest machines connect users to produce of clean electricity efficiently and affordably. Grid investment will also allay fears about energy security that have only grown with the conflict in Ukraine. In the US, some have argued that more fossil fuel investment will increase energy security. More fossil fuels will increase long-term risk to the economy, create stranded assets, destroy nature, worsen our health, and further damage our environment. Better grids are a virtuous cycle of greater demand for electrification and greater supply of clean energy. The choices that have to be made need leadership from government. That means committing money, building public-private partnerships, work with civil society and NGOs to craft win-win solutions. Once again, politics and leadership will matter.